Hello, everybody out there in radio land. Y'all are once again listening to Media Cyphers, only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. Here, Wider Kalamazoo, only source for political revolution in this case. This is a weekly news program and come on your dial and analyze what's going on here in Kalamazoo, the state of Michigan, the so-called United States, and the rest of the world from a working class perspective. As always, the following thoughts, views, and opinions are not necessarily those of 89.1 WIDR or Western Michigan University, no matter how dope or insightful they may turn out to be. So we got about 2 episodes left before the semester wraps up. So I want to make sure we fit in a lot of really important stories, that have been going on here around town and again all over the world. So we're going to be spending some time on today's episode looking at some recent developments in Michigan politics that I thought were really important to mention. We've got some good news and some bad news. Often a lot of bad news on the show, but we do have some good news to break it up. And again, we're going to be giving you some more updates about what is going on in Gaza, local and national responses to it from both the working and the ruling class. Tell y'all what's going on with that. Got a frustrating news update about the Line 5 pipeline up in the Mackinac Straits. But I did want to start today's program with some good news. So, if you've been following our show or the goings on here on campus for the last couple of years, you might know that the Professional Instructors Organization, which is the local union that organizes part-time instructors, teachers' aides, grad student teachers, that etc. They have been organizing for the last many months. I'd like to say it's either between a year and a half or 2 years that this has been something they've been pushing against the university for some quality of life boilerplate stuff. Talking about a living wage. It really is the crux of it. And the university historically has kind of brushed them off, kind of those old chestnuts about how, like, well, you're not supposed to live off of part-time work, et cetera, et cetera. We've got instructors here at Western who are literally making less than a subsistence wage. You may have seen some of the signs around campus. McDonald's workers are making more than your instructors, which isn't to say that McDonald's workers should not be also making a living wage, but it is to say that the university has been criminally underpaying the part-time instructors here at Western for a long time. But the news just broke last week that the professional instructors organization here at Western has gotten some concessions from the university that are really nothing to sneeze at. It includes a 20.5% pay increase next fall, bonuses for the current semester, and a pay increase coming in the spring. Again, we want a tip of the hat to the PIO here on campus for raising awareness to these issues, for getting what they deserve, being part of the whole tapestry of successful strikes and labor actions that have happened across the country this year and across the state. Some of y'all may remember some of our coverage from the spring and early summer talking about instructors over at the University of Michigan who were organizing around very similar demands. So again, big props to them and a big congratulations from me, Andy Argo, and the rest of the Media Cyphers team for finally getting what y'all deserve. And again, a little bit of shame the university they didn't do it sooner. Y'all can get pay increases to the president, President Montgomery. Y'all can build this multi-million-dollar student center that I am now broadcasting out of, which was again to the tune of something like $90 million. But you had to drag your feet on making sure your employees got a living wage. Hmm. So we're a little bit of a head scratcher there. So again, if you want to find out more about this, you can look them up. Professional Instructors Organization, who have at least gotten some concessions from the university, and this is something that we're going to continue to follow. Again, there's a lot of on-campus workers who aren't getting maybe their due, and a lot of workers here in Kalamazoo that I hopefully, I think could get inspired by the successful push from the Professional Instructors Organization here on campus. So the next thing I think we're going to get to here, we might be hopping to statewide stories. I didn't have a ton of local stuff to talk about on today's program, but there's some very important local stories, or Michigan stories, I should say, that we're going to be talking about. And I guess I'll hit you with some more good news before we get to the bad stuff. And the good news is that we've got an expansion of voting rights here in the state of Michigan. And this actually goes back to a ballot proposal that was on the ballot in the last election. They're not this election, but the election before it, the last federal election, I should say, which was basically it was on the ballot, all about expanding democracy, making it easier to vote, and a very prescient sense talking about tamping down on potential intimidation at the polls, which was a really huge concern back in 2020. Y'all who lived through it probably remember that quite well. So I'm going to read a little bit from this article. This comes to us from WWMT, um, which is our local CBS affiliate. Headline is Whitmer signs bill pre-registering future voters, banning election worker harassment. It's written by Rachel Louise Just. I'm going to give you kind of just some of the bullet points of what this newly signed bill entails. A voter-approved plan to broadly expand access to voting in Michigan is officially law. This is the second bill package of a two-part series that works off of the dozens of changes to election law that 60% of voters demanded last year with Proposition 2. The bills make changes to election laws in the state, including making it illegal to harass or prevent election workers from doing their jobs, which, as we all remember, was a huge problem in 2020. You particularly had Donald Trump and a lot of the right-wing media apparatus jumping on election workers in the Detroit area for reasons that probably should be evidence to anybody who understands the history of political dog whistling, gesturing towards all of the election fraud in Detroit, which is happens to be a majority black city, majority working class black city. But as I just mentioned, the bills will make changes to election laws in the state, includes making it illegal to harass or prevent election workers from doing their jobs, and pre-registering 16 and 17-year-olds to vote. An earlier bill package, which Whitmer also signed this month, got rid of a law stopping voters from taking ride shares like Lyft and Uber to the polls, and lets the state create a system for active duty service members to get absentee ballots back to Michigan electronically. Proposition 2 changes implemented Michigan expanded access to voting through absentee ballots, including allowing voters to sign up to automatically receive an absentee ballot and 9 days of early in-person voting. So I want to also kind of point something out here. If you look back at the polling data uh, going up to that election and Proposition 2, what always is very interesting to me is the way that a lot of these common sense democracy measures have very clear bipartisan support. You saw that with the passing of that anti-gerrymandering, voters not politicians effort, which again had broad bipartisan support among rank and file Democrats and Republicans. And you also saw that with this recent one, even though this was during kind of that fall slash winter of discontent, where you had Trump and his cronies really pushing this false narrative of election fraud, which is not to say that American democracy is particularly healthy by any degree, but um, much like what the right wing does with just about every other issue, instead of speaking to the root cause or the reality that our democracy is captured by corporations and capitalism, they gesture towards black election workers in Detroit or immigrants voting or dead people voting or any number of these made up conspiratorial issues so that some of the people in their base who maybe have an awareness, a very vague awareness that something is rotten with our democracy will point their finger at the wrong people instead, of course, the ruling class. So again, this is a good thing. And, on our show, we try to be very, very real with y'all about the limits of, some, democratic participation, the way they get captured by, the capitalists. But at the end of the day, it is better to have more people able to vote traditionally. When more people are able to vote, more working class people are able to vote, which usually leads to more progressive politicians and policies getting put into place. You're not going to overthrow capitalist hegemony overnight, but it certainly does help, and can help alleviate at least some of the worst actions and actors um, among the ruling class from being able to carry out their agenda unimpeded. So again, if you want to read that whole article, that is WWMT. Whitmer signs bill pre-registering future voters and banning election worker harassment. So we're going to take just a quick little break, just a quick little coffee break for yours truly. We come back. Well, I gave you the good news. Let's get into some bad news. We're going to talk a little bit about the evil slasher villain that just can't stay dead. And we're going to talk about Line 5, which is popping up back in the news because it has just gotten another approval from a regulatory agency here in Michigan, which brings Enbridge one step closer to putting an ecological ticking time bomb up in here in the Mackinac Straits. Y'all listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. A quick reminder, you can also find us online. We're on Facebook, and we've got a podcast. You can find it in most podcasting apps. That's Media Cyphers Kalamazoo. Also, check out our YouTube page. We upload all of our episodes there. Kind of try to do more curated content for the podcast. Anyway, we'll be right back. Y'all listening to Media Cyphers, your only source for political revolution. Hello, everybody out there in radio land. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. So if you're just joining us, we started the show with a little bit of good news. Power to the workers here at Western. Congratulations to the Professional Instructors Organization for getting some much deserved and much needed pay raises. Also, voting is going to be fundamentally easier, especially for younger folks here on campus. They're going to start pre-registering voters at 16 and 17. Um, and a lot of folks here at Western are in that age range. If you're freshmen and stuff, or you've got friends back in high school or siblings, let them know the news. They can start voting soon. And even if you're a cynical old Marxist like myself, again, exercising your right to vote, it is at least a form of damage control that the working class can engage in while we're living under, the ruling class of capitalists and stuff. Um, anyway, this next story touches on kind of the intersections of colonialism, capitalism, and the sovereignty not only of native peoples, but also the people of Michigan in general. As one could guess, most Michiganders do not want Enbridge to build a new oil pipeline across the Mackinac Straits, but they're doing it anyway. They're doing their darndest to push up against again, if you're looking at the timeline, you had Governor Whitmer, who reached into her toolbox, trying to do what she could at the level. They basically just ignored the governor and went straight to some of the regulatory agencies here in Michigan that again have various levels of empathy to Enbridge's point of view. I kind of put it politely as I can here. Um, who have essentially rubber stamped this pipeline that again is vastly unpopular with both Democrats and Republicans. Again, even a lot of the kind of what we would call bourgeois folks in Michigan who maybe live along the lakeshore, it's like even if you're a hardcore Republican, you can put two together and understand it's going to hurt your bottom line if there is an oil leak in the Straits of Mackinac, which would be such a thing would probably be one of the most unprecedented environmental disasters in the history of Michigan in the Midwest. Um, it's a vital artery. It's one of the largest freshwater sources in the world, which is going to be especially important as climate chaos ratchets up in the years to come. So contaminating a gigantic portion of it is, by all accounts, a bad idea. Unless, of course, you don't live in Michigan and you're a Canadian oil company that doesn't really care that much about our environment to begin with. Um, before I do more commentary, let me at least update y'all on exactly what's going on. You're like, Andy, why are you complaining about Line 5 again? I thought we'd slayed that dragon. It's like, well, uh, you know, um, everything that dies someday comes back, as Bruce Springsteen used to say. Or well, probably a more appropriate metaphor is like Line 5 is like he's like Jason or Michael Myers. Just when you just when you think he's dead, comes back. and sequels that are just keep getting worse and worse every time. So this time it was the Michigan Public Service Commission that approved the Enbridge Line 5 permit for a tunnel under the Straits of Mackinac. I'm reading from an article from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. It was written by Caitlin Luby. The approval from the Michigan Public Service Commission comes after 3 years of contested litigation between the oil company, tribes, and environmental groups. The project would replace Enbridge's existing Line 5 pipeline in the Straits of Mackinac with an underground pipeline tunnel. The Line 5 pipeline runs for approximately 4.5 miles across the lake bottom of the Straits of Mackinac. The current pipeline diverges into two steel pipes, but the Calgary-based company has proposed to replace it with a single pipe that will be housed in a tunnel bored through rock and buried beneath the lake bed. One permit has already been approved from the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, which is being challenged by environmental groups. One more permit approval is needed from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which is currently slated for 2026. Enbridge filed its application to build a replacement tunnel to Michigan's Public Service Commission in 2020. The commission took up the permit application as a contested case, which allowed other parties to intervene. For instance, the Bay Mills Indian community, represented by Earth Justice and the Native American Rights Fund, intervened, arguing that Line 5 poses a threat to treaty rights, economies, and welfare of tribal citizens throughout the region. And we're just coming off of the Thanksgiving holiday. Usually, we do an episode where we try to highlight Indigenous and Native American issues. We didn't quite get to do that this year, but that's why I wanted to spend some extra time, especially looking at this story from this angle. I mostly before kind of talked about this issue from an environmental perspective, and I wanted to kind of quote directly from the Bay Mills Indian community, which they constitute a population kind of living towards the Upper Peninsula. But this is a statement that they have on their website about their opposition to the Line 5 pipeline. I thought would be worth repeating or bringing to y'all on the show here. The Anishinaabe people of Bay Mills say life as we know it today began in the Straits of Mackinac. They consider the waters where Lake Huron and Lake Erie meet a sacred space. The area remains integral to daily practice of cultural lifeways and is full of historic and archaeological sites. From time immemorial to today, communities, local businesses, and tribal members depend on the abundant fish and wildlife in the Straits of Mackinac. Commercial and subsistence fishing and hunting continue to provide economic survival for the majority of tribal members. In the 1950s, without tribal consultation nor seeking public input, the state of Michigan granted Enbridge a lease and permission to build the original Line 5 dual pipeline in spite of the risk of oil spills in the Great Lakes. Again, that's from the Bay Mills Indian community. Now, just to clarify, some folks may be asking, didn't the governor and the attorney general stand up against this? So here's a little bit of clarification. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer ran on a platform to shut down the pipeline. Whitmer revoked Enbridge's easement soon after she entered office in 2020, and Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel is suing Enbridge to shut the pipeline down. The proposed project still needs other permits to move forward, said David Gover, attorney for the Native American Rights Fund, in a statement. We cannot allow one corporation to imperil the ecosystems and lives all that live nearby or depend on the straits for their well-being. So quick aside, because it's worth repeating this. This is a talking point I bring up almost anytime we're talking about Line 5, but for those who don't remember, and this is about 13 years ago, so some folks listening might have just been little kids then. Enbridge is responsible for one of the largest inland oil spills in U.S. history, and it happened right here in Kalamazoo. Nearly 1 million gallons of oil leaked into the Kalamazoo River after there was a rupture in one of Enbridge's pipes. This led to years of ecological devastation, death of wildlife and livestock, and years of chronic and adverse health conditions for us Southwest Michiganders living along the river. This was not only due to the neglect that happened in the first place, where Enbridge allowed their infrastructure to decay to such a point that this rupture happened, but their cleanup efforts were ramshackle. It's been exposed over the years that they literally just kind of piled dirt over some of these oil spills, and basically had to be forced to do the proper cleanup job after being shown their malfeasance. So this is a corporation that has literally used our community as an ecological sacrifice zone for their own profits, refused to clean it up properly. And again, they prioritize their bottom line over the health and safety of anybody here in the state of Michigan. Why would we expect anything different should such a disaster happen in the Straits of Mackinac. Said this wasn't long ago. This is in 2010, 13 years ago. And it's worth mentioning, I think, that, you know, while there is, this situation is still playing out in the courts between what, Governor Gretchen Whitmer and Dana Nessel are pushing. We're still at this point where they just need one more permit to begin that construction. We should remember too, in similar cases, I think back to Standing Rock, they didn't even wait for the Army Corps of Engineers to begin construction. And I think that is something everybody out there should keep in mind, is the resistance to the Dakota Access Pipeline that occurred in 2016 over at Standing Rock. I think it is a prime example of how people can resist this the building of this fossil fuel infrastructure through direct action. Ultimately, there's been a lot of back and forth about that pipeline, some L's and some W's. But I'm just going to tell my listeners, we should not depend on the governor or the attorney general to save us or save our waters from this corporate colonialism. It is probably, if I were a betting person, I would say it is probably going to need and require the working class of Michigan to rise up and engage in direct action. Now, whether that's being a water protector and going to camp, or, and this is an important one, doing strategic work stoppages, general strikes, which again, I think that might be the greatest untapped power of our state's working class. Those are going to be some of the tools that we will need to think through, especially going into 2025 and 2026, when we might get a little closer to the final verdict on whether Enbridge can plant a ticking time bomb in the Macinac Straits. So if you want to read any more information from that article, again, that's from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. The headline is Michigan Public Service Commission approves Enbridge Line 5 permit for tunnel under Straits of Mackinac. It's written by Caitlin Luby, published on December 1st. We're going to take another quick little break. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. Quick reminder, you can also find us online. We've got a YouTube and a Facebook page. And Media Cyphers Kalamazoo, you can find it on most podcasting apps. Keep your dial locked. We got more ahead on Media Cyphers, your only source for political revolution. Hello again, everybody out there in Radio Land. Y'all listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. Just joining us, we just gave you an update on Line 5, which is distressingly and somewhat depressingly a little bit closer to becoming a reality. But again, ain't over till the fat lady sings, and we will see, especially in the next couple of years to come, whether or not we, the people of Michigan, will have to, resist that directly. This next one, this is kind of more of a quick hit, but I wanted to give you all this update. The Michigan's first LGBTQ plus commission has formed, and there's a very informative article from MLive kind of detailing the who's who of this commission. I wanted to kind of bring this to you. This is an article from Jordan Hermani. The first ever members of Michigan's LGBTQ plus commission were announced last week, with members ranging from university level staff to longtime advocates within the community itself. As we face a national state of emergency for LGBTQ plus Americans, Michigan has been a beacon of hope for equality under Governor Whitmer's leadership. said Dakota Turolsky, Michigan State Director for the Human Rights Campaign, which, by the way, I believe Dakota is an alumni from here and has also been on our show before. Is a proud proud of Dakota going on to bigger and better things. And again, he's the state director for the Human Rights Campaign now. So from including explicit protections for sexual orientation and gender identity in the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act to protecting youth from the harmful practice of conversion therapy, Michigan is leading by example. Today, implementing the first ever statewide LGBTQ plus commission is yet another stride towards making Michigan a more welcoming and prosperous place for all. And before I kind of tell you about I'll kind of detail who's who here. Just a little background: the commission was first created in June when Governor Gretchen Whitmer signed off on an executive order, which created an advisory body within the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. It is responsible for reviewing, developing, and recommending policies focused on preventing discrimination against LGBTQ Michiganders. Um, and I would say there's a lot of really good choices on this list that represent a lot of different constituencies. Um, as you could guess, my far left self was a little skeptical about the inclusion of Danielle Woods, who is basically an LGBTQ liaison officer for the Detroit Police Department. It oversees LGBTQ investigations and complaints. And, um, I guess I won't say too much on that. Uh, there's the systemic critique of policing that longtime listeners of mine have probably heard before. Um, I'm sure Danielle Woods has probably done some good um, in their community. But again, I'm always a little bit suspicious, or kind of doubtful when the police are roped into commissions and such like this. Also worth noting, Kalamazoo local Aaron Knott, the executive director of Equality Michigan, is also going to be on this panel. And again, we should have a little bit of hometown pride for that. Aaron Knott's been doing a lot of really phenomenal work for many years, not only through Human Rights Campaign, but as a former city commissioner. Not always agreed with her. Um, you may remember I had a pretty extensive critique about her response to the Proud Boys showing up in town and more or less kind of like telling counter protesters they shouldn't have been there and other stuff. But on many other issues, Aaron is very much on point, and I'm glad we have such a strong advocate from our community who's going to be up there. So again, if you want to find out more about some of the other members of the commission, you can check out this article from MLive. Meet the first ever members of Michigan's LGBTQ plus commission. It's published on December 4th, written by Jordan Hermani. So we're going to pivot now. I think that's it for our Michigan stories. Let me double check here. I don't want to misspeak. Let's see here. Yep. Did that. Okay. So what we're gonna do next, we're gonna transition to talking about Israel and Palestine and Gaza and both what's going on here locally as well as around the world. Um, y'all listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org, your only source for political revolution. Again, you can find us online. We're on Facebook. We are on YouTube, and you can find our podcast on most podcasting applications. And definitely, yeah, please, we encourage everybody to subscribe. Um, as you very well know, it is hard to get numbers out there for left-wing media. Often they are getting demonetized. The algorithms are working against them. So really, word of mouth is key when we are talking about getting the show and our materials out there. We'll be right back, only here on 89.1 WIDR, your only source for political revolution. Hello, everybody out there in Radio Land. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. Next section of the show, we've got a couple of articles here kind of giving you the latest on what is going on. I have some pertinent updates I felt for the situation going on in Gaza. And again, kind of reflecting on how what developments are going on here kind of on the home front. And we're going to kind of open with a very local response from up in Grand Rapids to some kind of enhanced police intimidation slash surveillance of peaceful protesters up in Grand Rapids who were calling for some of their local representatives to stand for a ceasefire. So this comes from the Grand Rapids Institute for Information Democracy. It's written by Jeff Smith and published on December 3rd. Palestine Solidarity March shows up at Representative Schulten's home, resulting in 10 GRPD cruisers sent to harass those demanding a ceasefire and end to U.S. military aid to Israel. On Saturday, there were an estimated 150 people who came out to protest to show solidarity with Palestinians and to demand an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and the West Bank. Unlike previous protests in support of Palestine, Saturday was held at Martin Luther King Jr. Park in the southeast part of Grand Rapids. The protest slash march was held in that neighborhood primarily because Representative Hillary Schulten lives in that neighborhood. GRIID has been posting articles critical of Representative Schulten's unconditional support of Israel even prior to the October 7th Hamas attack. Most recently, the author of this article wrote a critique of Schulten's statement on the so-called pause. Schulten has been the target of a fair amount of criticism in the past month, including 3 of those activists getting arrested at her Grand Rapids office in the federal building about 4 weeks ago. The protest slash march began with a short rally, followed by marching in the streets, specifically in the residential neighborhood around MLK Park. People also dropped off a small handout at the homes of those who lived on the march route. Several people who handed out the flyers had commented that the feedback was mostly positive. People came out of their homes to greet those showing solidarity with the Palestinian cause. The march wove through the neighborhood surrounding the park and eventually arrived at the home of Representative Schulten. When the march arrived at Schulten's place, someone put a makeshift yard sign in her front lawn, which demanded an end to U.S. military aid for Israel. Someone else delivered a list of demands that is part of a larger campaign that has been targeting Representative Schulten, along with Senators Gary Peters and Debbie Stabenow. The campaign targeting these members of Congress is demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, an end to the annual $3.8 billion in U.S. military aid, and a no vote on the proposed $14.3 billion the Biden administration has been calling for over the past month. And we'll put this in the show notes. They give you, there is a link you can click on if you would like to kind of file a similar petition or statement of disagreement. So after about 15 minutes of chanting outside of Representative Schulten's home, those doing crowd safety noted that a few GRPD cruisers had arrived, parking further south on Benjamin Street. A few minutes later, people got word that 2 more GRPD cruisers showed up on the north end of the same street. So crowd safety people urged those standing in front of Schulten's house to move in order to avoid getting boxed in by the cops. Just as the protest march was leaving Schulten's place, an ambulance and a fire truck arrived and pulled up in front of a house that was two doors down. There was also a white unmarked cruiser, which just happened to be the chief of police, which made those of us doing crowd safety suspicious, since why would Chief Lindstrom be out and about on a Saturday? The march then moved to Alexander Street, which is on the south side of MLK Park. All of the marchers were off the street by this time, walking back to the spot where the protest march had begun, when all of a sudden 10 GRPD cruisers showed up with lights on and several cops exiting their cars. The march had a car included, which was doing safety from the rear, making sure that no motorists would drive into those marching. This is a standard practice, especially after what happened in Charlottesville in 2017 when a white supremacist drove into an anti racist crowd of protesters, killing one of those protesters, Heather Heyer, for those who don't remember. The GRPD ended up giving a ticket to the comrade driving the safety car, saying they were blocking traffic, which is, of course, ridiculous considering that on a Saturday in a residential neighborhood, there was essentially no traffic to block. Thus, the GRPD was just looking for any excuse to harass those who were doing the protesting. During this time, lots of people had their phones out, recording the GRPD and chanting, "Police violence is a crime from Grand Rapids to Palestine," which is a theme raised at the beginning of the rally by one of the speakers with the Comrade Collective, citing the example of GRPD's murder of Patrick Loyoya, a Congolese refugee in April of 2022. The repressive displays from the GRPD was instructive, since it demonstrated to many at the march just how insidious they could be. The Palestine Solidarity March was clearly a nonviolent action, was very supportive, with very limited disruption, along with the fact that most of the public they encountered along the way were both supportive and appreciative of what they were doing. The GRPD's behavior was particularly instructive to those who were newer to protest movement politics, and also demonstrated how the GRPD reacts to actions that operate outside of the normal downtown marches, which the GRP has grown accustomed to. The GRPD may also have been alerted to the protests because they stopped in front of Representative Schultz's house for some 15 to 20 minutes, further demonstrating their commitment to protecting systems of power, even when those in power are complicit in war crimes. If you want to read more about that, that is, again, from the Grand Rapids Institute for Information Democracy. Palestine Solidarity March shows up at Representative Schultz's home, resulting in 10 GRPD cruisers set to harass those demanding a ceasefire and end to U.S. military aid to Israel. The headline is kind of a mouthful, but I think that's very important. And again, hats off to the work that Grid is doing up there in Grand Rapids. Our next one, this is really exciting news. It comes to us. This was from Left Voice, but I think if you heard me talk on the show, if we were able to somehow combine the energy around labor organizing that has really been ascendant this year, with resistance to the genocide going on in Gaza, that would be a winning combination. And it looks like something like that is coming to fruition. In particular, the UAW, who just recently secured some wins from the major automotive corporations. This is an article from Left Voice, kind of going into detail about that. The UAW has called for a ceasefire. It's time for all of labor to stand up. It was written by Rose Limlick and was published on December 2nd. On Friday, at a press conference of labor leaders in front of the White House, United Auto Workers Region 9A Director Brandon Mansilla announced that the international UAW, meaning the entire union, had joined calls for a ceasefire in Gaza and made plans to investigate its ties to the Israeli military. The UAW represents over 400,000 workers in the U.S. and over 500,000 retired workers, which makes it the largest union to do so in the U.S. UAW International President Shawn Fain soon followed Mansilla's press conference announcement with a post on Twitter expressing pride in the union's decision. And according to Shawn Fain, "I am proud that the UAW International Union is calling for a ceasefire in Israel and Palestine. From opposing fascism in World War II to mobilizing against apartheid South Africa and the Contra War, the UAW has consistently stood for justice across the globe. Now, that's a really beautiful thing to hear because we often hear from even, kind of centrist liberal types, kind of stay in your lane. You're an automotive workers union. Why are you talking about international politics? We've heard that here in Kalamazoo. A few years ago, KNOW tried passing a resolution at the city level, expressing support for Palestine and condemning the violence of the Israeli state. And at least a couple of the commissioners, I think Mayor Anderson, basically made the argument that local municipalities should not get involved in these type of international politics, and I don't really see the reason to do this meaningless resolution and all that kind of stuff. Well, I would say at least in particular, the case of the UAW, these folks have some leverage. I mean, they control a very important and profitable industry. And if they can push that industry in a certain direction, that could chip away at some of the kind of impregnable armor that kind of the Israeli state has been functioning with billions of dollars of support from the U.S. and the impunity, increasing impunity it feels to just genocide the heck out of Palestinians. This announcement comes after months of actions by a mass international movement for Palestine in the streets, on university campuses, and within unions like Starbucks Workers United that have helped call attention to Israel's atrocities and helped to dramatically shift public opinion. This movement includes academic unions, many of whom are part of the UAW. UAW members at Harvard, Columbia, and NYU have been threatened with firing or eviction for pro-Palestine speech in their workplaces. And the struggles of university campuses against this neo-McCarthyism have played a role in catalyzing internal pressure on the UAW International Executive Board from rank-and-file UAW members. It is worth noting that all three of these academic unions are in Region 9A. And before becoming director of Region 9A, Mansilla was the president of HGSU. Before Friday, Regions 9A and 6 were the largest governing bodies of the UAW that had signed on the call for a ceasefire. Region 6 covers much of the West Coast and also includes many academic unions, including those of the UC campuses and USC. This progressive move marks a large shift from top UAW leadership, who, as Jacobin writer Alex Press told in these times, have historically not only largely ignored its Arab Workers' Caucus in 1973, when they pushed for the union to divest itself from Israeli bonds. In more recent years, it has also intervened to prevent locals from endorsing the movement for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. Beyond joining international calls for a ceasefire, Mansilla announced that the UAW's IEB, the highest decision-making body in its bureaucracy, made up of the president, secretary-treasurer, vice presidents, and 9 regional directors, will be investigating the history of Israel and Palestine, our union's economic ties to the conflict, and explore how we can have a just transition for our U.S. workers from war to peace. Again, very promising. Again, this is another beautiful aspect of the modern re-radicalization of American labor is it is starting to form a more internationalist character. We're seeing it here with the UAW, the Amazon union has also made tremendous strides in being more overtly internationalist. Chris Smalls notably visited Cuba. I think it was either earlier this year or last year. Has been very vocal about standing up for international issues. And as this article just mentioned, so as the emerging Starbucks union. So these are all really positive signs of a working class that is not only reasserting itself, but is savvy, aware, and has the organizational power and muscle to stand up against some of the excesses of U.S. empire, in this case, directly funding the genocide going on in Gaza right now. Going on, this announcement by the International UAW, the parent union of all UAW locals and shop floor unions, indicates institutional support at the highest level of the union's bureaucracy for two things. First, that regions, locals, and individual unions that want to organize for Palestine in their workplaces may have some level of backing from the union leadership. It is essential that UAW take every step to protect members against McCarthyist attacks, as well as supporting non members in the same institutions. That means standing against the attacks on SJP and JVP at Columbia and against all attacks on students and non union workers as well. Second, that the International Union is indicating that after years of calls to divest from Israel from the BDS movement, the UAW leadership is opening a discussion about its ties to Israel and to weapons manufacturing. This announcement by the UAW appears to follow the framework described by labor historian Jeff Shirky in Jewish Currents in late November, which suggests that the success the UAW has had seen incorporating the just transition for a Green New Deal movement into its successful 2023 strikes at the big three auto companies and winning the unionization of new electric vehicle plants at GM should be extended to a conversion plan for shifting unionized UAW workers at Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and General Dynamics out of the U.S. war machine and into socially productive manufacturing and engineering instead. Already, rank and file UAW workers are planning to reach out to UAW workers at these companies and try to do the organizing that would be required to get the shop floors of these weapon manufacturers to support divestment from weapons manufacturing. Shirke makes a false equivalency between the just transition and the conversion plans, however, in ignoring that the UAW was only able to unionize EV plants that were already planned by GM following the Biden administration's legislation to galvanize production of electric vehicles, a domestic infrastructure investment with a primary goal of competing technologically and geopolitically with China. Neither the Biden administration nor the Democratic or Republican parties will lead the charge in converting any part of the U.S.'s military industrial complex into peacetime manufacturing. The call to arms, or away from them in this case, must come from the rank and file UAW workers themselves, who are the only ones who may find both the willingness and the power to shut down these companies' war efforts. Importantly, Shirke points out U.S. unions long ago ceded management rights to the bosses, meaning that employers call the shots on what is produced when and how, and that any contest over plant conversion would require a radical expansion of unions' limited purview. For rank and file UAW workers, this means organizing to actually take democratic control over their workplaces, to the point where they decide what gets made and who it gets sold to. Like the Lucas plant of the 1970s, where highly skilled workers at a UK aerospace company collectively put together a plan to produce socially useful systems and machines instead, UAW workers in every workplace, including weapons manufacturers, could challenge the capitalist status quo and assert their power over the production process they are part of. UAW workers in weapons manufacturers cannot be the only ones fighting, and the UAW and smaller unions that have made similar calls for ceasefire, including UE, APWU, IUPAT, CTU, and others, cannot be the only ones involved in this fight. We call on all unions to follow their lead. Additionally, we call on the UAW, UE, and other signatories of their petition to go beyond joining a call for a ceasefire and demand an end to Israeli military aid from the United States. Just as a quick side note, there's even I've criticized Bernie Sanders a lot for not calling for a ceasefire, but there is this big progressive push right now to make aid to Israel conditional on how it treats civilians. I know even Bernie Sanders is kind of trying to be at the front of that. Basically saying we shouldn't give money to Israel if they're just going to genocide people. Again, a lot of criticism for not just calling for a ceasefire, but there is that effort also going on. Going on, all workers should organize in their workplaces to disrupt any connections to the U.S. or Israeli war machines or disrupt business as usual for the U.S. ruling class in solidarity with Palestine. Nothing moves without workers. Flexing this power could look like university lab scientists, many of whom are now unionized with the UAW, immediately stopping work on contracts with the Israeli Defense Force or U.S. Department of Defense, or for the medium or long term, organizing themselves to demand their labs stop applying for grants from the Department of Defense or licensing their discoveries or inventions to any military powers, working to divest scientific research from imperialism. It could look like unionized teachers organizing to radically change their curricula to tell the truth about U.S. imperialism and the Israeli genocide of Palestine. It could look like tech workers organizing to cancel their company's contracts with the Israeli Defense Force for cloud computing technology that the Israeli security state uses to surveil and bomb Palestinians. It could look like unionized auto workers and teachers and laborers and engineers all marching in a labor contingent in the next big protest in the streets, shoulder to shoulder with the students, writers, healthcare workers, and more who are marching in solidarity with Palestine. These workers should demand an immediate end to the siege, the end of U.S. aid to Israel, an immediate divestment of our unions and workplaces from Israel, and stand against the apartheid state of Israel and for a free Palestine. So again, if you want to read that full article, that's from Left Voice. The UAW has called for a ceasefire. It's time for all of labor to stand up. And really quickly, I just want to contrast that a little bit with a story that happened since we were on last week. Congress passed a resolution that basically states, in no uncertain terms, equating anti Zionism with anti Semitism, which is to say, if you do not support the state of Israel, you are anti Semitic, according to Congress. Of course, Congress is incorrect. Wouldn't be the first time. But What was really staggering about that is literally only two politicians in the House voted differently, did not vote yay on it. One was a Republican, I can't remember his name. The other was Rashida Tlaib, who voted present. Um, and I think it gives us a really stark contrast between where the U.S. government is and where the U.S. working class is. On one side, you have the U.S. government that is really just towing the line that you cannot criticize Israel without being anti-Semitic. Now, I did a very long explanation on previous episodes about the difference between Zionism and Judaism and anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. To quickly put it in a nutshell, to be an anti-Zionist is to oppose the political project of colonization of the lands of Palestine for an Israeli ethno-state, which they really only want to include um, Jews, versus anti-Semitism, which again is explicitly anti-Jewish, ties into like anti-Jewish tropes. Again, you can criticize Israel without criticizing Judaism because they are two separate things. And anybody who tries to make you think they're one and the same is either on the side of the type of apartheid nonsense Israel is doing, or they are a useful idiot for it. I'm sure in Congress we've got a mixture of both. But we look at how the UAW is mobilizing its workers to stand on the right side of history, which, again, if you look at recent polling, is basically where most of the American working class is at. It's really stunning, actually. Like I said, we've been talking about this issue on our show for years, and it was the first time I can recall such broad criticism of what Israel is doing and such broad support for the people who are suffering in Gaza. As we kind of talked about in the last episode, a lot of that has to do with, the Israeli propaganda is really failing, and also they've become too extreme. It's hard for anybody with a conscience to look at what Israel is doing and how the words they are saying and see it as anything but an attempt to genocide the people of Gaza, to enact a second Nakba, which is but that refers to back in the late 40s when some of the original right wing Zionists colonized the area and drove Palestinians out. Just a quick historical side note too. It is worth mentioning Zionism was not always inherently a political project. There were, or not political project, colonial project. There were initially some were like kind of left-wing Zionists who thought of Israel as like a place where Israelis, Jews, and Arabs could live in harmony and together and stuff. But there were right-wing ones who got the backing of Britain and the US and other imperial powers to basically copy their homework and enact the colonizers' playbook against the people living in Palestine, which is, again, probably the greatest historical tragedy and irony of the 20th century. As we've said time and time again, historical trauma does not give you a hall pass to enact that on someone else. And a lot of the early Zionists and the Zionists of today very cynically invoke the Holocaust, and we're going to be talking about that in just a sec, in more detail. Invoke the Holocaust while doing Nazi stuff. I mean, again, a lot of what Israel is doing right now is very similar to what the Nazis did to the Jews in World War II, and in many cases copying their homework. But a lot of people can't see it. And I mean, yeah, again, some Israeli settlers have gotten so far radicalized that they just can't really understand that historical irony. Um, but I'm kind of you know losing the plot here. This is a great article. I really encourage folks to read it. The UAW has called for a ceasefire. It's time for all of labor to stand up. We're going to take another quick little break. I'm just going to sip on my coffee just a second here. When we come back, we are going to dive into a couple more articles about Israel Palestine. And we're going to talk a little bit about Kissinger. I mean, how can I not? Um, Y'all listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org, your only source for political revolution. Hello, we are back. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. Now, before we continue on our Palestine stories, I actually wanted to make a really important correction. If y'all were listening last week, I was talking about the young men who were shot at in Burlington, Vermont, ostensibly for being Palestinian. And erroneously, I said that they'd been murdered. That was a mistake. They are all still alive and but in various states of recovery in hospital. So again, I want to be very thankful that they're not dead. And it. I would apologize for not doing my due diligence with that bit of news. I guess the state of gun violence and mass shootings in this country. It's almost like a safer assumption to assume that um, people are getting people got murdered or didn't survive. And I went through the thought process of why I made that error, and it made me a little bit depressed. It's just um, but no, thankfully they are still alive, and in fact they are speaking out. I really want to get a lot of people would just be trying to keep a low profile, but I want to share the words of um, they read a statement um, from one of the victims of this hate crime, Hisham Arwatani, and Professor Bashara Dumani, the Mahmoud Darwish Professor of Palestinian Studies, read a statement from the student who is currently recovering in hospital. And this is powerful stuff. This is a college student, not unlike all of y'all who are walking around the Western campus right now. And he had this to say. And if you don't take anything else from my show today, really just absorb this. I would like to start out by saying that I greatly appreciate all the love and prayers being sent my way. Who knew that all I had to do to become famous was to get shot? I also appreciate people can have a sense of humor about really dark stuff and tragic circumstances. Anyway, as much as I appreciate the love from every single one of you here today, I am but one casualty in this much wider conflict. Had I been shot in the West Bank where I grew up, the medical services which saved my life here would likely have been withheld by the Israeli army. The soldier who would have shot me would go home and never be convicted. I understand that the pain is so much more real and immediate because many of you know me, but any attack like this is horrific, be it here or in Palestine. This is why when you send your wishes and light your candles for me today, your mind should not just be focused on me as an individual, but rather as a proud member of a people being oppressed. Again, very powerful words from Hisham Arwartani, who was shot last week in Burlington while walking with some friends to his grandmother's Thanksgiving get together by, again, some hateful right wing nut who's probably watching too much Fox News. And so I talked a little bit about the invocation of the Holocaust. That's going to be the story we go to next because there's this really important and kind of disturbing story I want to talk about. But before we do that, there's this really good article from the New Republic that I wanted to talk about, which goes into kind of some political speculation of the consequences of Biden's unapologetic support for Israel. And this relates especially to a lot of the young people who are listening to this and who are going to school here today. The ultimate cost of Biden's refusal to call for a full ceasefire in Gaza. This is, again, from the New Republic, written by Trita Parsi. 2 months ago, buffeted by economic pessimism and concerns about his age, President Biden explained once again why he's seeking re-election. I'm running because democracy is at stake, Biden told the crowd at a Democratic fundraiser. And let there be no question, Donald Trump and his MAGA Republicans are determined to destroy American democracy. And I will always defend, protect, and fight for our democracy, according to Joe Biden, who, again, is supporting a genocide in Gaza. Anyway, a few weeks later, Hamas launched its brutal attack on Israel, and Israel responded by bombarding and then invading the Gaza Strip, with the explicit support of the Biden administration. The president's popularity, in the negative for more than 2 years now, has fallen further amid the war, and polls show that Biden's steadfast opposition to a sustained Gaza ceasefire is largely to blame. Given his belief that a Republican victory in 2024 may spell the end of our democracy, a critical question must be asked. What U.S. interest is of such crucial importance in Israel's assault on Gaza that it warrants risking not just Biden's reelection, but American democracy itself? The notion that the 2024 elections are existential for the country may sound alarmist, but it's widely and genuinely believed among Democrats. Nancy Pelosi told CNN 2 months ago that nothing less is at stake than our democracy on election night. Hillary Clinton went as far to note that Hitler was duly elected, adding that if Donald Trump defeats Biden next year, it would be the end of our country as we know it. It is precisely because of this prediction, accurate or not, that Biden's resistance to a full-blown ceasefire, as opposed to the temporary truce Biden seeks to take credit for, which is already over, by the way, and the Israel's already just going right back to brutalizing the Gaza Strip. But anyway, it makes it all more perplexing. A series of polls have shown that Biden's defense of Israel's war conduct is a key factor behind his declining poll numbers, particularly among younger voters whose support proved crucial for his 2020 victory over Trump. That year, 65% of Gen Z voters supported Biden, which was 11% more than any other age group. And turnout among Gen Z and young millennials was crucial. Between 53 and 55% of registered 18 to 29-year-olds voted in 2020, according to the New Policy Institute's Simon Rosenberg, who told CNBC that this might be the highest ever recorded in the modern era of politics. The bad news is, of course, this cohort, which any millennial or Gen Z listening to this is probably already going to guess. This cohort has a dramatically different view of Israel than older age groups. According to a 2022 survey by Pew Research Center, 50% of people aged 18 to 29 have an unfavorable view of Israel versus 28% of Americans older than 65, a divergence that has only become sharper in the past few weeks. An NBC News poll released on Sunday found that between September and November, Biden's approval rating among voters aged 18 to 34 fell from 46% to 31%. That's a 15-point drop. It's no mystery why. A stunning 70%, 70% of voters in this age group disapprove of his handling of the war in Gaza. This poll is a stunner, and it's stunning because of the impact the Israel-Hamas war is having on Biden. More bad news for Biden. Young voters tend to be loyal not to a party or candidate, but to their preferred policy objectives, often voting on a single issue. This shouldn't really be surprising to my younger listeners as well. Uh, we have two generations who are baked in a very cynical view of politics. So when you go to vote, most people are supporting, certain policies that might get done, certain terrible policies that might be prevented, et cetera, et cetera. In 2020, they didn't vote for Biden, they voted against Trump, more specifically, his policy agenda. They weren't excited about Biden, but their lack of enthusiasm about him as a person didn't really dissuade that generation from coming out and voting for Democrats. At first glance, this may sound favorable to Biden, who is surely hoping that young voters will back him again out of fear of Trump's agenda. But if these voters' sentiments toward Biden turn negative from neutral as a result of his stance on Gaza, a considerable amount of the Trump rebellion effect may be neutralized, resulting in a considerable portion of young voters either supporting a third-party candidate or sitting the election out. Faced with two candidates whose agenda they oppose, many Gen Zers will simply stay at home. To put it another way, all our lives, Gen Z and millennials have been kind of, you got to vote for the lesser of two evils. We've never really been presented with a candidate outside of maybe Bernie Sanders, who seemed like he would be genuinely a good person and good for the country. But it's all about damage control. In 2020, millennials and Gen Z I bet Joe Biden will do less damage in the next 4 years than Donald Trump would. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. I kind of think it is difference between like fascism and diet fascism. There's still concentration camps in this country, but I think one could at least objectively say that yeah, maybe things are less bad with Biden in charge, but when it pivots from the lesser of two evils to like the lesser of two genociders, the cynicism and darkness of that choice is enough to really just turn a lot of people off from voting altogether. And really, it's hard to blame them. So again, if you want to read that full article, because there is a bit more after that in the midst. That's the ultimate cost of Biden's refusal to call for a full ceasefire in Gaza. That was written by Trita Parsi. I've got one more article to bring to you. It comes from the Electronic Intifada. So again, there's a little bit of bias baked into here, but I do agree with most of the points they're making, and it is based on real statements that the Auschwitz Museum is making. It's written by Ali Abu Nima, and is why is the Auschwitz Museum justifying Israel's genocide? I'm mostly just gonna kind of pivot to what the Auschwitz Museum said, and I'm going to give you my personal take on it. So I'm not going to really read too much from the article, but again, if you want to read from it, it's there. The International Council of the Auschwitz Museum earlier this month issued a statement supporting Israel's genocide in the Gaza Strip under the banner of self-defense. This grotesque move by an institution whose alleged mission is to warn against indifference to the kinds of atrocities perpetrated by the Nazis at the infamous Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp came on November 18th. This was after weeks of merciless Israeli bombing, which had by that time killed more than 13,000 Palestinians, including 5,500 children. According to the New York Times, which again has often been a propaganda outlet for the Israeli state, and that's another thing we're seeing. Like even a lot of commentators in mainstream media who always have knee-jerk defense of Israel are seeing what Israel's doing, and they have to like, wow, y'all are doing a lot of genocide. Um, but even the New York Times is saying the pace of Israel's killing of civilians in Gaza has few precedents in this century. To find a historical comparison for so many large bombs in such a small area, we may have to go back to Vietnam or the Second World War, said Mark Garlasco, a military advisor for the Dutch organization PAX and a former senior intelligence analyst at the Pentagon. In response to all of this, what's going on, the Auschwitz consul said, threatened in its existence, the state of Israel has the right to self defense in accordance with international law and the principles of humanitarianism. The existence of a free, sovereign, and democratic Jewish state is one of the pillars of world peace, it asserted. Well, that's all well and good, except Israel at this time is not democratic. It's not particularly free. They're clamping down on their own press that has been critical of the Israeli government. They're treating Palestinians like a subjugated, oppressed peoples. It's an apartheid state. They are not acting in accordance with international law. The literal way that they are warfighting is a violation of international law. They're not being humanitarian by any stretch of the imagination. The state of Israel cannot claim a right to self-defense from a territory it is occupying. That is like in legal terms, they can't. Um, they cannot claim to self-defense against somewhere in their own territory that is resisting occupation. Now, that's not to say Hamas hasn't also committed war crimes, but let's talk about scale here. Anything Hamas did on October 7th is absolutely dwarfed by everything Israel has done since then and everything it's done before. Again, this started 75 years ago, not a month ago, as we've said before on the show. But I guess I just really want to point out there is a certain there's just something really grotesque about the Auschwitz Museum coming out and posting this uncritical support of Israel and what they are doing right now. Because as many activists with groups like Jewish Voice for Peace have pointed out, never again means never again for everyone. And that means Jews, that means Palestinians, it means Christians who are being unfairly persecuted and bombed in the Gaza Strip. It means immigrants in detention centers here in the United States, which are themselves concentration camps. And while it's not altogether surprising, seeing this from the Auschwitz Museum is gut churning in a way that a lot of these other blanket statements from pro-Zionist organizations isn't, because this is Auschwitz-Birkenau is a living historical example of the worst, the worst humanity can do of man's inhumanity to man. Um, and I myself actually visited Auschwitz about 10 years ago. I was on a European backpacking trip and I was in Poland, and I felt it was really important to actually go to that site. And to say that you can just feel the ghosts in that place is kind of an understatement. Um, you have a visceral reaction in your stomach walking through um, that camp. You actually walk through like the shower room at one point. It's something that sticks with you for the rest of your life if you ever get to experience it. So when I read this article, that's what I thought back to, was my experience actually walking around like the Auschwitz camp. And that somebody could cynically take that experience and use it to justify what's going on in Gaza right now is it's really beyond disgusting and it's beyond the pale. Um, and really, the folks who are running the Auschwitz Museum should be profoundly ashamed of themselves for ignoring the lessons of their own history in order to try to score propaganda points for Israel, or the Israeli government, I should say. So we'll link to that in our show notes. We got a couple more things to talk about on the show here. We are kind of rounding out towards the end of the program. We're gonna take a quick little break. Y'all listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. Again, you can find Media Cyphers online. We've got a Facebook page. We're also on YouTube where you can find all of our episodes. If you missed some of this, you're only caught part of it, you want to listen to the whole thing or share it with your friends, that's the best way to do so. Uh, we also have a Media Cyphers Kalamazoo podcast where you can find kind of more curated best of material on there. Y'all listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR, your only source for political revolution. We will be right back. Hello, everybody. We're back. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. So I got one last story I want to hit on. And this one, we're actually circling back to the so-called United States. So this next story is it's about the not so Supreme Court. So, and it's talking about how and you know this is a great example of a story that mainstream media really isn't covering, but the implications of it are pretty scary. And this comes to us from the World Socialist website, who again I've had some issues with them before, but good reporting is good reporting. So we're going to share this article with y'all. This is article by John Burton, published on December 3rd. Right-wing Supreme Court majority on brink of gutting federal regulatory powers. At oral arguments Wednesday morning, the right-wing majority of Supreme Court justices sympathized openly with an extremist position advocated by the attorney for a fascistic con artist that threatens long-standing federal powers to regulate the securities markets and other major business activities, including workplace safety, environmental protections, and healthcare. The decision is the closely watched case could strip about 24 federal agencies of the authority to hold administrative hearings to assess penalties for regulatory violations. Instead, agency lawyers will be forced to litigate such claims in the already congested federal court system, where alleged violators can invoke the right to a jury trial. George Jarkessi is a former stockbroker turned right-wing media commentator and conspiracy theorist who established a reputation in certain circles by supporting the Tea Party and attacking then President Barack Obama as a communist surrounded by advisors from the Muslim Brotherhood. Which, by the way, I wish he was the monster they say is. That would have been a lot of fun. Alternative history 2020, but Barack Obama gets reelected. It's like, oh, by the way, I've been a secret communist the whole time. And I'm gonna replace Congress with a democracy led by the working class. Woohoo! Anyway, um, in one segment, Jarkessi claimed the Civil War was driven by overtaxation in the North and the need for money from the South, which, side note, folks, it's about slavery, just in case you didn't know. Anyway, to cash in on his fascist audience, Jarkessi set up small hedge funds totaling $20 to $30 million by attracting between 100 and 200 gullible investors. After the funds predictably collapsed, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission charged Jarkessi with bilking his investors by lying about the assets held, inflating their values to generate excessive fees, and misrepresenting the identities of auditors and brokers. Instead of suing in court, the SEC presented its case to an administrative law judge employed by the commission itself, who held a 12-day hearing rejecting Jarkessi's testimony as evasive and unreliable, and sustained the charges. Jarkessi was ordered to stop his fraudulent activities, return almost $700,000 stolen from investors, and pay a $300,000 penalty. Such administrative proceedings have become ubiquitous over the last 75 years as a primary mechanism for enforcing federal regulations that provide at least a modicum of protection for the public. Accordingly, they have become the target of pro business and libertarian organizations bent on removing all impediments to generating profits through fraud, exploitation, environmental pollution, and outright swindling. Jarkessi petitioned a review of the SEC penalty in the right wing dominated Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, headquartered in New Orleans. Instead of asserting his innocence, he challenged the constitutionality of the SEC's administrative procedures themselves. Shocking many legal observers, two of the three judges, one nominated by George W. Bush and the other by Donald Trump, essentially ruled the entire federal administrative law system that had been in place since 1946 to be unconstitutional. Dissent was by an 87-year-old Reagan-nominated judge. There are nearly 2,000 administrative law judges compared to less than 900 federal court judges. Forcing all their cases into the federal judiciary for resolution will result in log jams, making meaningful enforcement of federal regulations impossible. This is the purpose of this ruling and, again, this suit. The SEC appealed to the Supreme Court, where a conglomeration of pro business and libertarian organizations, right wing think tanks, and billionaires, including Mark Cuban and Elon Musk, have filed a friend of the court briefs in support of Jarkessi. Wednesday's oral arguments focused entirely on the Seventh Amendment of the Bill of Rights that guarantees the right of trial by jury for suits of common law, which would apply where the SEC limited to civil actions in federal courts rather than the more streamlined administrative proceedings to assess fines for regulatory violations. In a landmark 1977 workplace safety case, Atlas Roofing Company versus Occupational Safety and Health Commission, the Supreme Court ruled explicitly that administrative law courts have the power to assess fines based on regulatory violations because such proceedings enforce public rights and are not suits at common law. That precedent would seem to resolve the issue, except that the corrupt right-wing bloc in support of the Supreme Court has no regard for precedents or the rule of stare decisis that interfere with its overtly political goals. For those familiar with the Supreme Court's outrageous expansion of qualified immunity, a doctrine fabricated by the court that frequently deprives civil rights plaintiffs of their right to jury trials for police killings and other egregious official misconduct, the sanctimonious defense of the Seventh Amendment for a Wall Street swindler by these justices was truly stomach-churning. Most outspoken was Associate Justice Neil Gorsuch. After calling the right to trial by jury a very important foundational freedom in American society and a check on all branches of government, he told the SEC's attorney the Seventh Amendment would, on your account, dissipate, disappear, whatever verb you want to use. Some may recall that Gorsuch's first Supreme Court opinion, 2018's Epic Systems versus Lewis, upheld the blanket use of compulsory arbitration clauses by businesses to deny their aggrieved employees the Seventh Amendment right to present employment-based cases to a jury. So just to make that explicit, as far as Neil Gorsuch is concerned, his idea on a right to jury trial really depends on whether you're a powerful corporation or you're an average Joe, in which case rights for the corporation, but not, rights for the corporation, but not for you, the average person. Anyway, Associate Justice Elena Kagan spoke most directly for the three moderate justices and the status quo, telling Jarcasi's lawyer that the use of administration fines has stood for 50 or 60 years because nobody has had the chutzpah, to quote my people, to bring it up since Atlas Roofing. Kagan added, when you say, well, we should go back to the common lawsuits that were brought 200 years ago in the courts of Westminster, in Congress's judgment after the Depression, after the savings and loan crisis after the Great Recession, is Congress's judgment that more powers were needed with an administrative agency entitled to no respect. There are two other challenges to federal regulatory agencies pending in the Supreme Court. The first, which challenged funding for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, was argued last month. In January, the Supreme Court will hear arguments on the Chevron doctrine, which requires that courts defer to an agency's interpretation of a statute. Many commentators are projecting that by the end of the Supreme Court's current term next June, there will be insufficient power remaining for federal agencies to regulate businesses and commerce effectively, turning the clock back to the wide open practices that culminated in the 1929 stock market crash and the ensuing Great Depression. Again, if you want to read that for yourself, that's from the World Socialist website. Right-wing Supreme Court majority on brink of gutting federal regulatory powers. This article by John Burton. Okay, I think with that, we're going to close out the show. Stay tuned in about 10 to 12 minutes. I'll be coming back to do electropop therapy. If you missed any of what you heard on today's program, check out our YouTube page. We put up our full episodes on there. We also have a page on Facebook where you get updates, the occasional meme, and we have a Media Cyphers podcast you can find on most podcasting applications. That's Media Cyphers Kalamazoo. I want to thank y'all for tuning in to today's program. We'll link all of the articles we discussed on today's show on our show notes on Facebook. And until next time, keep on fighting for that revolution solution.